7 children slept in a barn. Until a reclusive widower found them, the autumn rain drummed against the weathered roof of the old barn, each drop echoing through the vast emptiness that 67-year-old Harold Whitman had grown accustomed to over the past 3 years. His wife Martha had always said the barn was too big for just storing hay and old farm equipment, but Harold had never imagined it would become a sanctuary for 7 homeless children. It was a Tuesday morning when Harold ventured out to check on a leak in the barn's northeast corner. The October air in rural Nebraska carried the scent of dying leaves and impending winter, reminding him that he'd need to winterize the old structure soon. As he pushed open the heavy wooden door, a sound made him freeze, soft whimpering, like injured animals. "Hello," Harold called out, his voice hoarse from disuse. He rarely spoke to anyone these days, preferring the solitude of his 180-acre farm to the well-meaning but painful sympathy of townspeople. The whimpering stopped immediately. Harold's weathered hands trembled slightly as he reached for the light switch, flooding the barn with harsh fluorescent light. What he saw made his heart clench with a mixture of shock and recognition. 7 children, ranging in age from what appeared to be 5 to 15 years old, huddled together in the far corner of the barn. They had created a makeshift shelter using old horse blankets and hay bales, their faces gaunt and eyes wide with fear. The oldest, a girl with tangled brown hair and fierce protective instincts, stepped forward. "Please don't call the police," she whispered, her voice barely audible above the rain. "We're not hurting anything. We'll leave if you want us to." Harold studied their faces, hollow cheeks, dark circles under their eyes, clothes that hung loose on their small frames. The youngest, a boy who couldn't have been more than 5, peeked out from behind his sister's leg, clutching a stuffed animal that had seen better days. "How long have you been here?" Harold asked, his voice gentler now. 3 weeks, the girl replied, lifting her chin defiantly despite the tremor in her voice. "Maybe 4. We don't bother nobody." Harold's mind raced. 3 weeks. They'd been living in his barn for 3 weeks, and he'd never noticed. The realization hit him like a physical blow. He'd become so isolated, so lost in his own grief, that 7 children had been surviving just 50 yards from his house without his knowledge. "What are your names?" he asked, taking a cautious step forward. The girl hesitated, then seemed to make a decision. "I'm Sarah. This is my brother Tommy." She gestured to the small boy behind her. "And that's Marcus, Lisa, the twins Emma and Ethan, and Jake." Harold looked at each child, memorizing their faces. Sarah, clearly the leader despite being maybe 15. Tommy, the youngest with his worn teddy bear. Marcus, about 12, with intelligent eyes that had seen too much. Lisa, perhaps 8, with red hair and freckles that reminded him painfully of his own daughter at that age. The twins, Emma and Ethan, probably 7, holding hands and watching him with identical expressions of wariness. And Jake, maybe 10, standing slightly apart from the group with the cautious stance of a child who'd learned not to trust adults. "Are you siblings?" Harold asked. Sarah shook her head. "Foster siblings. We were all at the same place, but..." She trailed off, her jaw tightening. "Things got bad, real bad, so we left." Harold felt something shift inside his chest, a feeling he hadn't experienced in 3 years. The urge to protect, to provide, to be useful again. These children had been failed by the system meant to protect them, just as he had been failed by life when Martha died, and their own daughter, Rebecca, had cut all contact, unable to bear the weight of his grief. "Have you eaten today?" he asked. The children exchanged glances, a silent communication that spoke of their deep bond and shared struggle. Finally, Sarah shook her head. "Come on then," Harold said, surprising himself with the firmness in his voice. "Let's get you some breakfast." As he led the 7 children across the muddy yard toward his house, Harold caught sight of his reflection. In the kitchen window, for the first time in 3 years, he looked like he had a purpose. The kitchen of Harold's farmhouse hadn't seen this much activity. Since Martha's funeral 3 years ago, 7 children sat around the large oak table that had once hosted Sunday dinners and holiday gatherings, now laden with scrambled eggs, toast, and glasses of milk. Harold moved methodically round the kitchen, his movements becoming more confident with each passing minute. "Mrs. Patterson used to make eggs like this," Emma whispered to her twin brother Ethan, taking small, careful bites as if the food might disappear. "Who's Mrs. Patterson?" Harold asked, setting down a plate of bacon. "Our first foster mom," Sarah replied, her voice guarded. "Before the Hendersons." Harold didn't press for details about the Hendersons. The way Sarah's face darkened and the children's shoulders tensed told him enough. Instead, he poured himself a cup of coffee and sat down at the head of the table, a position he hadn't occupied since Martha's death. "You can't keep living in the barn," he said quietly. "Winter's coming. Last year we had snow by Halloween." "We'll figure something out," Sarah said quickly. "We always do." Harold studied her face, seeing the exhaustion beneath the determination. 15 years old, and she'd been caring for 6 other children on her own. The weight of that responsibility was etched in every line of her young face. "How long have you been taking care of everyone?" he asked. Sarah's spoon paused halfway to her mouth. "Since we left, about a month ago. Before that." "Since forever," Marcus spoke up, his voice bitter. "Sarah's always been the one looking out for us, even when the adults were supposed to." Harold felt a familiar ache in his chest. His own daughter Rebecca had been Sarah's age when she'd started pulling away, unable to handle his increasing bouts of depression after Martha's diagnosis. By the time Martha died, Rebecca was already living with her boyfriend's family, visiting only out of obligation. "What happened at the Hendersons?" Harold asked gently. The children exchanged those silent looks again, and Harold saw Jake's hand unconsciously move to his ribs, a gesture that made Harold's blood run cold. "Mr. Henderson thought discipline was important," Sarah said carefully. "Real important." Harold's jaw tightened. He'd seen enough in his 67 years to read between the lines. "And Mrs. Henderson?" "She wasn't around much," Lisa said quietly. "She worked double shifts at the hospital. I think she knew, but she didn't want to see it." Harold finished, the familiar weight of adults failing children, of people looking the other way when it was easier than confronting difficult truths. Tommy, who had been quietly eating his eggs, suddenly spoke up. "Are you going to make us go back?" The question hung in the air like a challenge. Harold looked at each child, Sarah with her fierce protectiveness, Marcus with his premature wisdom, Lisa with her gentle spirit, the twins with their unbreakable bond, Jake with his guarded hope, and Tommy with his innocent trust. "No," Harold said finally, "I'm not going to make you go back." The relief that washed over the children's faces was palpable. Sarah's shoulders sagged slightly, as if she'd been holding her breath for weeks. "But we need to figure out a better solution than the barn," Harold continued. "This house has 4 bedrooms. 3 of them haven't been used in years. You'd let us stay here?" Emma asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Harold thought about the silence that had filled this house for 3 years, the way he'd avoided entire rooms because they held too many memories. Maybe it was time those rooms served their purpose again. "Temporarily," he said, not wanting to make promises he couldn't keep, "until we figure out something more permanent." That afternoon, Harold found himself in the guest bedrooms for the first time since Martha's death, pulling sheets from closets and opening windows to let in fresh air. The children helped quietly, efficiently, as if they'd done this many times before. "Mr. Whitman," Sarah appeared in the doorway of what had been Rebecca's room. "Why are you helping us?" Harold paused in his task of making the bed. It was a question he'd been asking himself all day. "Because you need help," he said simply. "And maybe I need to help." That night, as Harold lay in his own bed listening to the unfamiliar sounds of children settling in for sleep, whispered conversations, the creak of floorboards, the soft closing of doors, he realized that for the first time in 3 years, the house felt alive again. But he also knew that tomorrow would bring new challenges. 7 children couldn't simply disappear from the system without consequences. There would be calls to make, explanations to give, and decisions that would affect all their lives. As he drifted off to sleep, Harold found himself thinking about Martha and what she would have said about 7 homeless children sleeping under their roof. He could almost hear her voice. "Harold Whitman, those children are a gift. Don't you dare waste it." The knock on Harold's door came at 7:30 a.m. on a Thursday morning, exactly 1 week after the children had moved from the barn to the house. Harold had been expecting it, but his heart still raced as he opened the door to find two women in professional attire standing on his porch. "Mr. Whitman, I'm Jana Morrison from Child Protective Services, and this is Detective Lisa Chen from the Douglas County Sheriff's Office. We need to speak with you about some missing children." Harold's hands trembled slightly as he gripped the door frame. Behind him, he could hear the children getting ready for the day. Sarah helping Tommy with his shoes, Marcus reading quietly to the twins, Lisa braiding Emma's hair. Normal, domestic sounds that had brought life back to his house. "May we come in?" Detective Chen asked, her tone professional but not unkind. Harold stepped aside, and the two women entered his living room. Within moments, all 7 children had appeared, clustering together near the staircase with the instinctive wariness of those who'd learned to fear authority figures. "There they are," Jana Morrison said, her voice carrying a mixture of relief and frustration. "Sarah, Marcus, Lisa, Emma, Ethan, Jake, and Tommy. We've been looking for you for over a month." Sarah stepped forward, her chin raised defiantly. "We're not going back to the Hendersons. The Hendersons are no longer certified for foster care," Detective Chen said gently. "There's been an investigation." Harold felt a surge of vindication, followed immediately by worry. "What happens to them now?" Jana Morrison consulted her clipboard. "They'll be placed in emergency foster care while we work on finding more permanent solutions. Unfortunately, finding a single home for 7 children is," she paused, choosing her words carefully, "challenging. You're going to split us up," Sarah said, her voice flat with the resignation of someone who'd heard this before. "We'll do our best to keep siblings together," Jana said. "Sarah and Tommy will stay together, and we'll try to place Emma and Ethan together as well. We're all siblings," Marcus said fiercely. "We're family." Harold watched the exchange, seeing the pain in each child's face. In the past week, he'd witnessed their deep bonds, how Sarah helped Tommy with nightmares, how Marcus shared his portions with the smaller children, how the twins had created their own language of looks and gestures, how Jake had slowly begun to trust again, how Lisa had started singing while she helped with chores. "What about Mr. Whitman?" Tommy asked, his small voice cutting through the tension. "Can we stay with him?" Jana Morrison looked at Harold with barely concealed skepticism. "Mr. Whitman, while we appreciate your assistance, you're not a certified foster parent. You haven't been through the background checks, the home study, the training. There are procedures." "What would it take?" Harold asked, surprising himself with the question. "I'm sorry. What would it take for me to become a certified foster parent for all 7 of them?" Detective Chen and Jana Morrison exchanged glances. "Mr. Whitman," Jana said carefully, "foster care certification is a lengthy process. Background checks, home inspections, interviews, training courses. It takes months, sometimes a year. And frankly, your age and the number of children involved make this a very complex situation." "How long do I have?" Harold asked. "The children need to come with us today," Jana said. "But I can give you information about the certification process if you're serious about this." Harold looked at the 7 children, seeing their faces crumple with disappointment and fear. Sarah's protective stance, Marcus's attempt to be brave, Lisa's quiet tears, the twins clinging to each other, Jake's return to his guarded expression, and Tommy's confusion. "I'm serious," Harold said firmly, "and I want to speak with a lawyer." The next few hours were a blur of phone calls and negotiations. Harold called his nephew David, a lawyer in Omaha, who immediately drove out to the farm. The children were allowed to stay for the day while paperwork was sorted and temporary arrangements were made. "Uncle Harold," David said during a private moment in the kitchen, "are you sure about this? 7 children is a huge responsibility. You haven't even fully dealt with Aunt Martha's death yet." Harold looked through the window at the children playing in the yard, the first time he'd seen them truly relaxed since that morning in the barn. Sarah was pushing Tommy on the tire swing that had hung unused since Rebecca's childhood. Marcus was teaching the twins to skip stones in the pond. Lisa was picking wildflowers, and Jake was actually smiling as he helped her. Maybe taking care of them is exactly what I need to deal with Martha's death, Harold said. She always said this house was too big for just the two of us, David sighed. The system's going to fight you on this. Single man, your age, 7. Children with trauma histories. It's not going to be easy. Nothing worthwhile ever is. Harold replied, words Martha used to say when facing difficult decisions. That evening, after Jana Morrison and Detective Chen had left with promises to return the next day, Harold sat with the children around the dinner table. The mood was somber, the reality of their situation settling over them like a heavy blanket. Mr. Whitman, Sarah said quietly, you don't have to do this. We've been on our own before. We'll figure it out. Harold looked at her, this brave, stubborn girl who'd been forced to grow up too fast. Sarah, in the past week, I've watched. You help Tommy with his nightmares, make sure everyone eats before you do, and organize chores without being asked. You've been an adult since you were younger than Marcus is now. Sarah's eyes filled with tears she'd been holding back for weeks. You shouldn't have to figure it out alone anymore. Harold continued, none of you should. We're going to fight. This, and we're going to win, because that's what families do. They fight for each other. As the children helped clear the table, Harold caught sight of Martha's photograph on the mantel. For the first time since her death, he could have sworn he saw her smile. 6 months later, Harold stood in the same courtroom where he'd once settled Martha's estate. But this time the proceedings filled him with hope rather than grief. Judge Patricia Reeves shuffled through the papers before her, occasionally glancing at Harold and the 7 children seated in the front row. This is highly unusual, Judge Reeves said, her tone measured but not unkind. In my 23 years on the bench, I've never seen a case quite like this one. Harold's lawyer, his nephew David, leaned forward. Your Honor, my client has completed all required foster care training, passed extensive background checks, and his home has been inspected and approved. Character references have been provided by community members, including Pastor Williams, Dr. Henderson from the local clinic, and several neighbors. Dr. Henderson, Judge Reeves questioned, raising an eyebrow. Different Dr. Henderson, David clarified. Margaret Henderson, the pediatrician who's been caring for the children. No relation to their previous foster family. Harold felt Sarah's hand slip into his. Over the past 6 months, she'd slowly learned to trust again, to let herself be a teenager rather than a mother figure. The other children had flourished as well. Marcus had joined the middle school chess club. Lisa had started taking piano lessons. The twins had made friends at school. Jake had begun speaking up in class. And Tommy had stopped having nightmares. Mr. Whitman, Judge Reeves addressed him directly. You're 67 years old. These children range from 5 to 15. Are you prepared for the physical and emotional demands of raising 7 children? Harold stood, his voice steady. Your Honor, 6 months ago, I was a man waiting to die. I spent my days in an empty house, avoiding the rooms where my wife and I had raised our own daughter. I was so lost in my grief that 7 children lived in my barn for 3 weeks without my knowledge. He paused, glancing at the children. These children saved my life as much as I saved theirs. They brought purpose back to my days, laughter, back to my house, and hope back to my heart. I may be 67, but I've never been more prepared for anything in my life. Jana Morrison, who had become an ally over the months, stood to address the court. Your Honor, I've conducted monthly home visits. For the past 6 months, the children have thrived in Mr. Whitman's care. Their grades have improved, their psychological evaluations show significant progress, and they've formed genuine bonds with community members. What about long-term care? Judge Reeves asked. Mr. Whitman, you've made provisions for the children's future should something happen to you. Yes, Your Honor. My nephew David and his wife have agreed to serve as guardians if needed. Additionally, I've established trust funds for each child's education, funded through the sale of portions of my farmland. Dr. Margaret Henderson rose from the gallery. Your Honor, if I may, I've been treating these children for 6 months. When they first came to my office, they were malnourished, anxious, and showed signs of trauma. Today, they're healthy, happy children who trust the adults in their lives. Mr. Whitman has given them something many foster children never receive: stability, unconditional love, and the security of knowing they belong somewhere. Judge Reeves looked at the children. Sarah, as the eldest, I'd like to hear from you. How do you feel about Mr. Whitman's petition to adopt you and your siblings? Sarah stood, her voice clear and strong. Your Honor, before Mr. Whitman found us, I spent every day worried about how to keep my brothers and sisters safe, fed, and together. I was 15 years old, and I felt like I was failing them every day. She glanced at Harold, her eyes bright. With unshed tears, Mr. Whitman didn't just give us a home. He gave us a family. He taught Marcus to drive the tractor. He helped Lisa with her piano recitals. He learned to braid Emma's hair. He's teaching Ethan to whittle. He's been to every single one of Jake's soccer games, and he reads to Tommy every night. Sarah's voice grew stronger. More than that, he taught me that I don't have to carry everything alone, that it's okay to be a kid sometimes, that family isn't just about blood. It's about choosing to love each other every day. Judge Reeves was quiet for a long moment, studying the faces before her. This court has seen many cases involving the welfare of children. Too often, we see the system fail those it's meant to protect, but occasionally, we witness something extraordinary, a situation where love, determination, and circumstance combine to create something beautiful. She picked up her gavel. The petition for adoption is granted. Mr. Whitman, you are now the legal father of Sarah, Marcus, Lisa, Emma, Ethan, Jake, and Tommy Whitman. The courtroom erupted in cheers and tears. Harold found himself surrounded by his children, all talking at once, hugging him, each other, crying and laughing simultaneously. Later that evening, as the family sat around the dinner table that had once been silent and empty, Harold reflected on the journey that had brought them together. The barn still stood in the backyard, but it was no longer a desperate shelter. It had become a playhouse, a clubhouse, a place where the children went to build forts and tell stories. Dad, Tommy said, the words still new but growing more natural. Each day, will you tell us about Mom again? Harold smiled, thinking of Martha. Your mother would have loved you all so much. She always said this house was too big for just two people. She would have filled every room with laughter, just like you do. As the children scattered to do homework and chores, Sarah lingered in the kitchen, helping Harold with the dishes. Do you think she would have approved? Sarah asked quietly. Mom, I mean, Martha. Harold dried his hands and looked at his daughter, because that's what she was now, officially and forever. Sarah, the day I found you in that barn, I heard Martha's voice as clearly as I hear yours now. She told me you were all a gift, and not to waste it. Sarah smiled, the real smile that had taken months to return. I love you, Dad. I love you, too, sweetheart. All of you. Outside, the Nebraska wind whistled through the trees, carrying with it the promise of spring. The barn stood empty now, but the house was full of life, laughter, and the sound of a family that had found each other when they needed it most. 7 children had slept in a barn until a reclusive widower found them. But what they'd really found was that sometimes the most broken people can put each other back together. And that family isn't defined by blood or circumstance, but by the choice to love unconditionally. Harold Whitman had thought his story was ending. Instead, it was just beginning.